everyone. I have a guest on the show today who I've known for a long time, and I almost didn't know how to introduce him because where we started is not where we ended up. My guest today is Michael Murphy, partner and AI operating model lead at ADAPTOVATE, a global consultancy focused on helping large organizations build the agility to drive transformation. Michael has spent 20 years helping organizations adapt, whether accelerating AI adoption or diagnosing the systemic challenges that block real change. Before ADAPTOVATE, he was a leader in Deloitte's human capital practice, driving agile transformations across Canada, the US, and Germany. He also co-authored Deloitte's Global Adaptable Organization Methodology. What you might not know is that Michael started his career in arts and culture at Soul Pepper Theatre Company and the National Ballet of Canada. That background shapes everything about how he thinks about creativity, developing people, and the kind of leader he became. Before we get into it, if you're finding value in these conversations, I'd love for you to subscribe wherever you listen or watch. Michael is on the impact list because of what happened between us, not in spite of it. We did not start out as allies. We had to choose to become them. And that choice is the reason we're sitting here today. Today, we talk about what it actually takes to build trust through friction, the framework Michael created to pass his hardest lessons to the next generation, and what the future of consulting looks like when the rules are changing under everyone's feet. Let's get into it. Michael, I'm so excited to have you on the podcast today. You were one of those folks who, when I was writing my impact post for LinkedIn, and the dialogue we had, it would just opened up for me and reminded me of the years past at Deloitte, that all those things that you don't always remember. So I'm so excited to share our history at Deloitte and what you're doing today with the listeners.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Thrilled to be here.
When you think about the week, the month, the day you just had, what's something that's made you smile or given you pause?
A lot of our work at AdaptAvate is helping organizations think about how to really scale and embed AI across their organization. And so part of what that means is we've got to get pretty good at baseline using these tools, understand how to make them work for organizations and for our clients. And we recently just kind of made a big jump over to start using Claude. And so past 3 years of being deep in Gemini, being deep in GPT, I was like, okay, now I'm starting from scratch all over again. And it was just sitting in the dumbness and the lack of knowing how to muddle through. It was very humbling, but the tools are incredibly intuitive. And we lean on each other within our office and our team to help each other out. But it was I'm back feeling dumb on the first day of school again. And it's just a good reminder of how our clients and our colleagues and our friends who are also muddling through this are also going to sit in that deep muck of just not knowing. And that's okay, because we're all going through it in various ways, shapes, and forms. Yeah.
Absolutely. I've been spending a lot of time with Claude as well. And the first couple revs of something it pushes out for you, you're like, oh my God, this is amazing. This is such a great document. And then you read it and you're like, oh, I probably need to work a little bit more on this document, but I love that it's a good start.
Yeah.
It's not great what technology can do, but yeah.
And the code of it all, the co-work, they just launched design on Friday. They're launching more products at a quicker pace than I can be installing them. And here's where we are.
100%. Going back to what you just said, obviously, we're always in learning mode, but that's actually where you and I started together at Deloitte. And when I first think about when we first worked together, you were a newly promoted senior consultant. I was a new manager trying to find my footing in the practice. And that feeling of newness, we were both under pressure. So what I actually want to talk to you about is in that moment. I wanted to dig in a little bit because, as we said, we've always kind of had this honest dynamic. And so when you think about that period, when we were kind of working against each other, what was actually going on for you? When you think about the pressure that was spilling sideways, as somebody earlier in your career, what does that mean?
Yeah, I was thinking about this yesterday outside for a walk, and the pressure cooker of it all was such a different way of working for me. I'd come into consulting post MBA in my 30s, and it was a different environment where I was learning at an incredibly high pace. The expectations were different than what I had kind of been used to in my previous work experiences. And in kind of trying to internalize that and be the goal-oriented high achiever that most all of us are coming into that world, picked up some bad behaviors and let the pressure, I think, get to me in ways that if I look back now, I'm like, oh gosh, how would I ever think that that would be okay? And there was a perception, I'm not sure how real it was, but there was definitely a perception that like nothing could be dropped, that anything that was asked of you, you had to say yes to. And yeah, we can do it all. We can always, never let anything drop because that was a sign of weakness. And in kind of having to then think about what does that impact on a team environment, working with someone new, helping them, what should have been an opportunity to like set us each up for success, did not feel that way in the moment. And I was so grateful that like you sat me down in that office and face to face were like, girl, we got to fix this. And yeah, it like felt so refreshing that like someone was having a conversation about like, how do we help each other get through this rather than continuing to let the paradigm that was existing around us kind of be the norm.
And I think it's such an interesting thread you named, because I know when we talk about leadership, and I've talked about it on the show before, the concept of having to have the answers, that's one thing. We put that over there.
Yeah.
But the piece you just named around, we had to carry all the stuff. Like you just couldn't let anything fall down. I always think about those Dr. Seuss books where they have those characters carrying those really, really tall, very breakable glass structures. And that's what it felt like. It was like, you can't let anything move, fall down. And there is something about feeling like you're the only one that can carry this. You have to do this. And that intrinsic link that begins between who you are as a person and your job, and you almost feel like it gets so locked in those moments.
Absolutely. The way that consistency was used almost as this like sword of Damocles hanging over, the idea of how do we talk about performance? How do we talk about what good looks like? Well, good performers are consistent and they don't drop the ball. And like there's something to that. Like meeting your commitments is incredibly important. But this idea that you couldn't have a real conversation about what was realistically achievable. And so it became a vicious cycle of I think internalized fear that like I know that our conversations in the many years that followed that really helped kind of surface that, oh yeah, this was maybe not the healthiest way to think about that work, but it certainly built up a lot of skills.
Did you find there was a time for you where you had to make a shift about what was actually reasonable and feasible to be able to get to be your best self and to get the work done that you really wanted to do?
Yeah, I think practicing those conversations that helped articulate, yes, we could do this, but there's a trade-off around quality, around the number of revs that we want to get this into that excellent place, the high level of standards that I hold myself to, that my teams hold themselves to. Becoming more conversant about that trade-off conversation was a hard thing to practice because it wasn't easy to push back and be able to say, well, we can, but that's going to have these implications. It was not something that was naturally part of the toolkit of what was kind of socially acceptable. But I'm so glad that I have that now. And it took years to kind of build up that practice. It's not easy to manage saying no and pushing back in a way that everyone kind of walks away feeling, oh, that was reasonable.
And one of the things I love is kind of seeing once you get away from the pressure cooker, you move on to other things, as we all have, is seeing what we did with those learnings. And one of the items that you've shared with me over the years that I think is so interesting and compelling is it's your consulting, you've called it your consulting scared straight deck. It's like not just a framework, it's a values document. Share with the listeners a little bit about how this document came to be, why you've developed it, who sees that document on your team, because I think it's a great way that you've chosen to show up as a leader in your new environment.
I talk a lot about what I learned in the Big Four world, and man, it was just drinking from a fire hose. But I grew so much as an individual. I went and worked in Germany for 2 years, and all of the skills that were great about storytelling that were effective for me in North America had to be completely relearned in the German context because the expectations of that member firm and of clients in that environment were completely different. So I feel like I've had to relearn the job a few times in that span. And through all those learnings, I'm like, how do I help the next generation coming up absorb those learnings, build the discipline, and maybe without the trauma, or at least significantly less trauma. Not to be overstating, like, but there was some challenging times, some late nights, and I think that like hustle culture shaped me in some good ways, and as we talked about earlier, some also toxic ways. So how can I help people skip past some of that and help accelerate towards just building the discipline, building the skills? What does it mean to own something from end to end? And so like I often now with my teams will have like little fireside chats where we'll go to an offsite and we'll grab a beverage, like a hot chocolate or something around a campfire. And we'll just kind of talk about, here are some things where I've had great successes, and here are some things where it's been like a really tough personal failure. And like, here's what I learned from it. And hopefully they can impart some of those things into their own practice so that they can not have to kind of go through that challenging discovery on their own.
But it is so interesting, right? I mean, I think the Big Four is examples from where we both came from. And they do a great job of teaching you what like the best looks like. What is the top bar? And having that doesn't go away. You kind of take that with you into other worlds. And that apprenticeship model is so interesting that we grew up with. And the thing I like about where you took that is, instead of saying, the people around me should just know, they should just know all the things, the values, the lessons. There's something about codifying it and writing it down and sharing openly and honestly. I do think it accelerates the trust on the team. It accelerates everybody's ability to do great work while also still being in learning mode and being deliberate about it, right? I think sometimes as leaders, sometimes they'll pull back the layers of the onion and say,
Mhm.
ooh, you know what? I didn't do that well. Or, oh, actually, this was great, but not enough. I feel like that
Yeah.
level of transparency, you really do have to kind of reduce that ego sometimes to get the best out of the people around you, create that safe space.
Yeah, and I think especially now that most of our work is virtual, it's such a more challenging environment to apprentice somebody and help them build their craft. Some of my most memorable moments with great leaders were the walk to or back from the meeting, quick debrief on the spot. What was my feedback? What could I do better? Or even honestly, some like long drives off the client site in rural Michigan, or being stuck at an airport where you're really getting into passing on some wisdom or some lessons learned from, oh gosh, let's talk about that workshop. We've got a 7 hour drive ahead of us. And those things just happen much more rarely nowadays. And so it's, how do we accelerate that level of learning for apprentices who are coming up as junior consultants, who are coming up as the first time that they're managing people in a post-COVID world, and what do they need to be thinking about differently rather than just being an individual contributor? It's a different way of kind of practicing this craft, but it is a craft.
One of the things that you've shared with me over the years that really stuck with me is General McChrystal's decision-making approach. I really like that idea that if I were in your shoes with the information you have, I talk a lot about unconditional positive regard, which is quite similar. It's, you believe that the people around you are doing their best with the constraints they have, even though the outcomes might not be what you like. And I'm curious about how that decision-making approach for you shows up in how you lead today.
I think for me, it comes down to values, helping let my teams know what's important out of an engagement. Or if we're thinking about like a workshop context, okay, well, the space is really important. So that's going to be something that I want you to be caring a lot about as you go through this whole planning process, creating an environment that's going to be suitable for learning. Great. Now that you know that those values are important to me, I want you to carry that through in how you're going about planning. And I think you could cascade that through to a number of points across our client engagement or how we operate as a team, but letting people know what's important and why it's important, why you care so much about it, is going to say, okay, well, if they're then thinking about the space for that workshop, or who should be in the room, or what type of environment we should be trying to design towards, they then can approach that with, okay, well, I know Michael really cares about this and he's trying to achieve the X kind of impact. What can I then decide that's going to help achieve that type of impact, and cascade that through? So like for me, it's really about how do you communicate the values of what's important, because micromanaging the decisions down to charts and seating plan, those are not going to be useful things to be trying to micromanage. So I want people to be understanding the like values of what type of experience we're trying to create or what type of impact we're trying to have, and let them manage through the details, but keeping that reflection at the heart of it.
And tell me what that looks like when you are working with somebody and you see them internalize it. What do you typically see from the folks in your team?
Early on, I think if you're kind of just building up a relationship and working together for the first time, they'll often kind of mimic back what they've seen or heard as the kind of first stage of testing. Okay, I saw you make this decision, or I saw you frame something this way. Is that right? And then you can course correct with them through conversations to try and say, okay, I see that you were trying to reflect what you saw previously, but let's talk about the context about why this is different. And it becomes kind of gentle nudges back towards the center, trying to kind of drive that alignment. It comes from the high empowerment, high alignment is, I'm going to trust you to go figure out what the best way is, but I'm going to keep nudging you back towards that set of values as we think about how to get to that desired impact together.
And we spent a lot of time talking about kind of like teaching the values. Talk to me a little bit about that kind of duality that's got to be in place where you're not just teaching them, but you're modeling the values. What does that look like in practice?
Our team at ADAPTOVATE, we do a lot of retros internally and on a project or engagement level, but then also as an office. And we talk about what's working for us and how we collaborate, how we work together. And for the other senior leaders and myself, it's about being vulnerable and saying, yeah, actually, like I dropped the ball on that and I messed up, or we thought that we were going to head down this path with a new offering. Turns out that there wasn't market fit for it. So we're actually going to pivot, and that we can admit when those things don't pan out or they kind of fizzle, because the team, they're living it, they're seeing it. And so if we kind of just pretend that we're infallible and kind of work our way through that, then it undermines our credibility when we need to have tough conversations. So I think being as transparent as possible about, everyone can kind of see what's working well, but being really honest about what's not working well and how we're going to deal with it. If the team's in a funk, here's how we're going to try and shift things around. Here's how we're going to create more collaborative experiences, create more time for social connection. But acknowledging where we've kind of fallen down, I think, is the key to building that trust. So when you ask someone to go above and beyond, they know that you've rolled up the sleeves and offer that vulnerability as part of the social contract.
And one of the things I've always found really interesting about working with you is that like we'll have these really serious moments and then you flip the page and it's Ghostbusters or it's Taylor Swift
Yeah.
or it's something humorous. And I think we don't take enough time to have like joy in our day. I think we get really serious, really focused business. How do you kind of deliberately use it, especially in an age where organizations don't want more consultants in there? What are some of the ways that you infuse that in and you model that to your crew?
I mean, there's the part that I just can't help, which is we need to have some fun and some smiles to brighten our day. Like if we're just talking about PowerPoints and analysis and roadmaps for implementation, like my eyes will glaze over and I will fall asleep. So how do we make this a fun place to work and fun work to be enjoying each other's company and enjoying what we're building together and have some creative fun to it? So let's be a little silly sometimes, and it's going to make the time go faster and we're going to have more fun. But I think there is something to the idea of building trust with clients. Like we show up, chances are whoever has brought us in maybe hasn't socialized it with the entire organization. So a lot of people may feel justifiably threatened by, who are these people from the outside coming in here? Maybe they're going to tell me how to do my job. Are they just here for cost cutting? What are they going to do? What are they going to disrupt how we work today? So the idea of coming in external to an organization and trying to rapidly build trust, the more that we can get people on side and demonstrate, hey, we're not threatening. We're just here to try and be of support or assistance. we think it's these ways, but we want to have a dialogue and let us know like what you'd like. And one of the best ways to diffuse that tension is honestly some dad jokes to warm up the room. Maybe there's a fun British accent that comes out at some point, just to try and diffuse that tension and demonstrate that like we're not actually a threatening presence here. And if they can begin to laugh, it's gonna immediately, like, physiologically, they relax their bodies. They've had a laugh. They've gotten some oxygen to their brain. It's a good early on in engagements, but then also just in keeping the moment light. If people are going to have more fun, gosh, isn't that just a better way to spend our days?
Totally. I mean, it's always nice to be that group for sure. And it's something that I ask every guest, but I think it's kind of the right moment. Obviously you are the sum of all the experiences that you've had. And so when you reflect back and you think about who's on your own impact list, who is somebody for you when you think about your previous work experience that really comes to mind that helped you find your people, helped you find your way? Who is that for you? And tell me a bit about the story.
Yeah. During our time at Big Four, had a leader who I'd worked with briefly, but then worked on a small kind of side project quite closely, Jess Eden. And Jess came up to me one day in the like coffee room. They sat me down and said, I think you haven't found your peeps yet. And you're not having much fun. So let's help you find your peeps and help you find your fun. And they took me under their arm and made some introductions, set up some like coffee chats, and through that helped me navigate some challenging conversations to where people were looking for someone who kind of had my skill set, my creativity, and how I approached the work. And it turned out to actually be a great fit team-wise and based on the work. But it all kind of tied back to just being able to kind of navigate through and spot, ooh, Michael doesn't have a spark right now. Like we've lost that joy a little bit, where it's not getting a chance to kind of shine through in the same way. And so every other role that I've been in since, I'm always on the lookout for who hasn't found their peeps yet, and how can I be a catalyst to help them find the people that are gonna get their jokes, that are gonna want to make them come to work every day. People thrive at work when they have a best friend who they can gripe with, but also celebrate highs with. And I think that was an incredible moment for me, and kind of shaped the kind of leader that I wanted to be. I'm forever grateful to Jess and the way that they kind of really kind of helped me discover my own voice at that firm.
And I love it when you think about your consulting deck that we talked about earlier in the conversation. It's almost allowed you to become that version of Jess for the people coming up behind you, which is really, it's a wonderful thing that was your takeaway from your time at Deloitte, is that how do I help others find their voice and their community and their strengths and take that forward? So it really is a great extension of not just saying, I had this great experience, it made me feel seen, but you're doing that for other folks as well.
Mm-hmm.
And when we talk a little bit more about that future and the future generations that are coming up now, and they're coming up under all of us, one of the things I know that you're spending a lot of time on is developing that next generation. We see it in the deck, in the conversation we just had about Jess. But when you think about those entry-level roles being primed for consulting, what does that apprenticeship path look like today? How does it look different than when you and I started?
Yeah. Well, I think there's been a lot of digital ink spilled on how consulting as an industry is eroding. And I don't necessarily think that's true. I think it's going to shift, and the model is going to shift. If the type of consulting and advisory that you were doing was about producing a fancy, glossy report that was deep in analysis and made recommendations on grocery store pricing strategy, that might be certainly something that's highly at risk of being disrupted, if not already, certainly soon. But the types of consulting that I think we come from and that I think still will hold true forevermore are when we kind of shift out of pure research and advisory and much more into coaching, facilitation, teaching, implementation partnering on helping actually delivery get done across organizations. Because as much as agentic workflows, I think, are going to be prime for a lot of repetitive tasks that can be automated away, the political complexities of organizations, how workflows, how people are incentivized to collaborate or not collaborate, is going to continue to need people who can jump in on a short notice period, help solve discrete challenges alongside client teams, help work through the ambiguities and the navigation of differing, not even incentive structures, but just like all the messiness that comes from big organizations. That's where I think there's going to continue to be a space for the type of consulting that I live in, that our teams live in, helping people figure out what to do and how to do it together and how to do it quicker, better, in a more de-risked way with more engaged workforce.
Yeah, and it takes it back to like the beginning parts of this conversation where your deliverables can look amazing. I mean, that's what AI can absolutely help you with for sure. And it'll have the exact right word selected and the exact right font, and everything is left aligned beautifully. But it is the nuances of
Mhm.
human interactions that you just can't, that's not the stuff that AI can do right now. So
Yeah.
being able to sit in those messy buckets of coaching, especially in facilitation, when you are paying attention to all of the things in the room, all of the humans, the before, after, during, that really is something that can't be picked up. I think there's so much opportunity to remind people how to be human, remind people how to use just their human faculties of observation and listening and really seeing everybody. And it's the threads in this conversation of helping people feel seen and heard, really and truly, that sense of belonging, that I think that external consultants sometimes do that
Yeah.
because we get cut through some of the political noise that occurs that is hard when you're working with somebody every single day in the same job over and over. That's kind of the lens we bring. And so I love hearing you say that you see the place for it too. And you think that is folks listening to this who might just be coming up or wanting to shift into a consulting mode, there is still a ton of opportunity there.
And the more that we can create value and impact by bringing people together to accomplish decision making, to try and drive big, messy alignment conversations, to create memorable experiences, I think that's where we're going to continue to see consulting play a stronger value, and maybe even more so than it has in the past. But yeah, if your business is rooted in grocery store pricing reports, then that may have passed you by. It's going to mean different expectations across the different levels as they come up. I think that's why like every member of our firm is deep in learning the AI tools so that we can then show up to our clients and say, hey, we've identified our own workflows. We've had a sip of our own champagne. Like we know how uncomfortable this is going to be for you. Let's walk through this and help you map out your own processes, map out your own data sources. Let's talk about your risks and stakeholders. I think the more that we can say, hey, we've fallen down this hole before and we know the way out, I think that's going to be the lived experience that hopefully continues to help us differentiate in market.
Yeah. And I love that so much. It's kind of that full circle of really going back to helping people find their people. And I love that
Yeah.
you lead that way. And the work you're doing is that, and the practice that you're building at Adaptovate, this is similarly. And when we talk about the imprint that you leave on folks, when you think about the people who told you that they found their people because of you, what does that mean to you?
I think that's going to be part of the like proudest legacy that I could leave. At the end of my career, I look back, it will not be the PowerPoints, but it will be the like client conversations where they have said we were having a really challenging time and we so appreciated knowing that I could come to you in the middle of the night with crazy concerns or challenges, and I knew that you'd always be there to help talk me through it. And I think that's that trust of the trusted advisor relationship. We rely on our reputation being able to like stand behind our word. And I think that's been true of colleagues who become clients who become colleagues, that if people continue to appreciate what you contribute and they like working with you, and it inspires some level of followership, like that's to me the like big testament of this has all been worth it. This has been a success.
I love it. Well, last question for you before we close out today is, obviously the listeners may have found something in a lot of what you've said. So how can people find you and learn more about ADAPTOVATE? What's the best way to get a hold of you?
Michael Murphy on LinkedIn through ADAPTOVATE. We got a video series going. We have a Substack if folks want to subscribe. We'd love to stay in touch if they want to send me a DM or drop a quick comment on one of our videos. But yeah, certainly like it's we're pretty easy to find, adaptovate.com. Yeah, we'd love to stay in touch with all your listeners and viewers.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for the time today. It's been great to share a little bit more about the ins and outs of the relationship in the consulting world, and obviously look forward to seeing where everything's going to take you.
Yeah. Thanks, Laurie. Congrats on the podcast.
Thanks for listening to The Impact List. If today's conversation gave you something to think about, subscribe for more grounded, honest discussions with leaders who are figuring it out in real time. And if this episode would help someone you know, pass it along. This is your reminder to lead clearly, stay human, and focus on what actually matters.